Hey everyone! Welcome to Reality TV News Update, the place where we bring you the latest updates, fun moments, and behind-the-scenes stories you won't want to miss. Vince stood just outside the glowing stage where the finale lights blasted through the cracks in the curtains. He could hear the crowd shouting his name, but none of the excitement reached him. Instead, he felt a tight pressure inside his chest that refused to ease. A camera operator waved for him to take his spot, but Vince kept one hand pressed against the sidewall, as if steadying himself before a long fall. He had spent 93 days in the Big Brother house and thought he had learned everything about pressure, but the finale was something different. It made every emotion feel louder, brighter, heavier. And right now, the heaviest thing he carried was frustration. The crew motioned him forward again. He stepped onto the stage. The live audience roared. Julie Chen greeted him with her usual calm, but even she seemed to notice the way his jaw was locked. He tried to smile. It felt hard. Vince did not expect to feel this way tonight. For weeks, he imagined walking out proud, whether he won or lost, but his exit came only minutes after the final head of household competition. It was the most intense endurance challenge of the season, and he came within seconds of beating Ashley, who eventually won and chose Megan to sit next to her in the final two. Vince knew the decision made sense. He had played a social game strong enough that taking him to the end would have been a risk. But what gnawed at him was the way the last competition slipped away. He could still hear the buzzer that ended it. Too fast, too sudden. It had felt like someone reached into his chest and yanked his victory out by force. Now, on stage, he kept telling himself to breathe. Julie asked him how he felt coming so close to the finale, only to be cut at the final step. He looked into the camera and spoke clearly. "I don't know if I've ever been more frustrated in my life." The truth rang out of him before he had time to soften it. The audience reacted with a low, sympathetic sound. Julie nodded in understanding. Inside the jury box, his former housemates watched him with expressions that ranged from pity to curiosity. Ava leaned forward as if she wanted to hear every word. Morgan crossed her arms. Rachel gave him a small, encouraging smile. They all had their own big emotions about this season, but right now, Vince was the center of the narrative. Julie continued her questions. How did he feel about Ashley's decision? Did he think she made the right move? Vince answered with honesty. Ashley was one of the strongest competitors he had ever met. Her loyalty was always practical. She did not take him because she wanted the best possible shot at winning. He understood the strategy. He respected it. But none of that erased the sting. The segment ended. Vince moved backstage again and waited for the jury roundtable to begin. He could feel the frustration swirling, but there was also something else beneath it, a faint sense of unfinished business. He sat down on a metal folding chair and stared at the floor. His thoughts drifted back to the last days inside the house and the conversations that shaped everything. 3 days before the finale, he sat with Ashley at the small round kitchen table. The house was quiet. Megan was asleep in the have-not room. The tension between the three had been growing. Vince had tried to secure Ashley's trust by reminding her how strong they were as a pair, but Ashley's eyes always held something unreadable. She told him she believed in him, but her tone always gave him doubt. He replayed their last conversation before the final HOH. He remembered telling her they could beat Megan in the jury votes. He remembered her nod, but not smiling. Ashley kept her plans close. She always did. Vince had thought he still had a chance, though. A chance to win the final comp and choose his own ending. That hope had pushed him through every challenge, every eviction, every blindside. But the finale had a way of crushing dreams fast. Backstage, someone called his name. It was Morgan, the runner-up from an earlier season who had returned this year as a surprise participant. She slid into the seat beside him. "You good?" she asked. Vince gave a small shrug. "Tryin'." She studied him. "You know everyone saw how hard you fought. No one thinks you went out weak. That doesn't make it feel better, though." Morgan nodded. "No, it doesn't." He appreciated the honesty. He always did with her. They were interrupted as the producers called them all back out for the jury questioning. Vince followed the others. The bright stage hit him again, but this time he stood with his fellow jurors rather than alone. Ashley and Megan sat in the final two chairs, beaming under the lights.
The tension between them was obvious in the way they held their posture stiff and alert like athletes waiting for a referee's whistle. The jury questions began, and each person took their turns. Vince waited until the end. When his turn came, he stepped forward and locked eyes with Ashley. The crowd went silent. "You played one of the best strategic games I've ever seen. But I want to know something. In the last few weeks, did you ever genuinely consider taking me to the final two? Or was that idea gone before the final HOH even started?" Ashley inhaled slowly. She knew this was coming. She also knew the jury respected honesty. "I considered it," she said, "but I knew that if you made it to the end, the jury would look at your social connections and your ability to survive weeks of pressure, and they might give you the win. I couldn't take that risk. I had to play for myself." Vince held her gaze. He nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." He stepped back into the line, and the audience reacted with a mix of admiration and sympathy. His frustration did not vanish, but something shifted. Sometimes the truth, even when painful, helped bring closure. The jury later voted. The votes locked in, and the show prepared for the reveal. As they waited behind the scenes, Vince leaned against the wall again. This time, he felt less shaky. When they returned to the stage, Julie read the votes one by one. 4 for Ashley, 3 for Megan. Ashley became the winner of Big Brother Season 27. The confetti burst, the crowd screamed. Ashley sobbed into her hands before hugging Megan. Then she turned and found Vince. For a brief second, their eyes met. She mouthed, "Thank you," not for the vote, but for the season, for the partnership, for the competition that pushed her to be stronger. Vince nodded back. After the finale ended and the camera shut off, Vince walked outside the studio into the cooler night air. The moon hung low and soft. He breathed deeply for the first time that night. His frustration still lived inside him, but it no longer felt like a storm, more like a bruise, a reminder of how close he came and how hard he fought. Several fans called his name from beyond the gates. He waved. He felt a small smile tug at his face. Maybe he did not win, maybe the ending hurt more than he expected, but he also proved something to himself. He could survive the house. He could fight until the final minute. He could walk out with dignity even when disappointment clung to him. And maybe that mattered almost as much as the win. As he headed toward the waiting car that would take him to the post-show press, he whispered quietly to himself, "It's not the ending I wanted, but it's the story I lived." For the first time all night, the frustration eased just enough for him to breathe easier. The season was over, but his story was far from
backstage,
finished.
listening to the audience chanting as the Season 27 finale unfolded. The lights were hot, the noise was overwhelming, and his heart felt like it had been squeezed tight for hours. He had spent 93 days inside the Big Brother house, and somehow the pressure out here felt even worse. A crew member tapped his shoulder and pointed him toward the stage entrance. It was time for his exit interview. Vince nodded, but inside he felt the sting of the night all over again. He walked onto the stage. Cheers rose from the crowd, but he barely felt them. Julie greeted him with her calm voice and that familiar smile, but she looked at him with a kind of soft sympathy. She could sense what was weighing on him, and he could not pretend he was fine. When she asked him how he felt about losing the final head of household by seconds, he looked into the camera and spoke without thinking. "I don't know if I've ever been more frustrated in my life." The words hit him harder than he expected. They were painfully true. He had imagined making the finale for weeks, maybe even winning the whole thing. Instead, he found himself standing there as the last person cut from the game. A single challenge determined everything, and he fell short at the one moment he needed to be perfect. Julie gently guided him through the interview. She asked about Ashley and whether he understood her decision to evict him. Vince said he respected the game move. He knew he was a threat to anyone sitting next to him in the final two, but understanding the logic did not numb the disappointment. He had played with loyalty and strategy and heart. It felt unfair that the final chapter seemed to close so sharply. After the interview ended, Vince headed backstage where the jury prepared to question the finalists. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Morgan gave him a small nod of support. Ava studied him with concern. Rachel offered a quick, encouraging smile. They all knew this moment carried heavy emotions. "You holding up?" Morgan asked. "You played a winning game. Everyone knows that." "Still feels rough." She nodded. "It will for a while." They were called back to the stage and the jury took their seats.
Ashley and Megan sat under the bright lights, tense and ready. Both had fought hard to be there. The jury questioning began. Each juror asked their questions about strategy, honesty, loyalty, and social gameplay. Vince waited until the end. When his turn came, he stepped forward and focused on Ashley. The silence in the room sharpened. I want to know something real. In the final days, did you ever plan to take me to the end, or was it always Megan? Ashley took a breath before answering. She had built her whole game on strategy and directness. She owed him the truth. I thought about taking you, but I knew you would beat me. You connected with everyone in ways I did not. You survived weeks when people wanted you gone. You fought in every comp. I could not risk it. I had to take Megan because she gave me a better chance to win. Vince studied her expression. There was no mockery, no arrogance. It was simply honesty. He nodded once, then returned to his seat. The audience murmured with interest. It was clear to everyone that the game between them had been tight and intense. The votes were cast soon after. Each juror slipped their key into the box. Vince took a deep breath when it was his turn. He held the tea for a long second before placing it inside. He had made his decision. Win or lose for them, his game was already finished, and he had to accept that. The show went to commercial, and backstage, the finalists prepared for the reveal. Vince stood alone for a moment, leaning against the wall with his head tilted down. He thought about the last competition. He could still feel the weight of the harness, the strain on his muscles, the sound of Ashley's buzzer hitting a fraction before his. It replayed in his mind like a loop he could not shut off. But he also thought about the laughs in the kitchen, the alliances that shifted, the nights spent whispering strategy in the dark, the victories he did earn, the friendships he built. Those things mattered too. When the cameras came back, the cast gathered around the finalists. Julie opened the keys one by one. 3 votes for Megan, then 4 for Ashley. Ashley won Big Brother Season 27. The confetti sprayed down. Ashley burst into tears and hugged Megan before turning toward the jury. She locked eyes with Vince and mouthed, "Thank you." It was not about the vote. It was about the season they had survived together, about the battles and the respect. Vince nodded back with a quiet acceptance. After the cameras stopped rolling, the cast hugged each other and the crew began clearing the stage. The adrenaline faded, and Vince stepped outside into the cool night air behind the studio. The sky was dark and steady. For the first time that night, he did not feel overwhelmed. He just felt tired, human, real. Fans behind the barricade shouted his name, and he gave a small smile and waved. Their support softened the edge of the night. Maybe this was not the ending he imagined, but he walked out with people who believed in him and a story that meant something. He leaned his back against the brick wall and allowed himself a long breath. The frustration lingered, but not in the same suffocating way. It settled into something he could carry without breaking. He lost the game, but he did not lose himself. He played with courage. He played honestly. He played hard. And he knew something else too. Sometimes the hardest losses shape the strongest comebacks. He pushed off the wall and headed toward the car waiting for him. Tomorrow he would face interviews and social media and the world outside the house. But tonight, he let himself feel the disappointment and the pride together. He whispered to himself as he walked, "It hurts, but I gave everything." And slowly, the frustration eased into something almost peaceful.